All right, so we talked a little bit about the letter of recommendation, and that's a way for the college to get a little more information about who the individual student is and get that complete picture beyond just what's on the transcript that you had mentioned. So students want to know, who should I ask to write my letter? Do I ask my English teacher, my math teacher, a coach? Who are the people that they should be asking to write letters from?
Well, the general recommendation, and obviously schools and universities may have very specific requirements in terms of recommendations, but generally speaking, what we recommend on the college admission side is to really think about the teachers that have taught you in an academic core course. And I would define those core courses as English, history or social science, mathematics, applied sciences, foreign language. Who are the teachers that have taught you in one of those core academic courses that are going to be supportive of your candidacy as a college-going student and would be willing to write on your behalf to do so? The reason for that is we on the admission side are really trying to get a sense of, again, as I mentioned, readiness for academic work. How do you interact in an academic setting in terms of the classroom and conversation? How is it that you contribute meaningfully to those experiences for the students? And how have you grown as a student academically and intellectually in terms of your experience in high school? So that's a sort of broad sweeping recommendation. There are some colleges, universities that will ask specifically for recommendations from particular areas of academic interest. It could be perhaps a mathematics teacher if you're applying to a program that's connected to the applied sciences, maybe engineering specifically. So certainly be mindful in terms of what those academic recommendation requirements may be at a particular college or university, because you want to make sure that what you're submitting is A, what they're asking for, and B, what's going to help be most supportive to you in terms of your candidacy at that college or university specifically. There are some colleges and universities, and I work at one, where we're not asking for specific academic areas, but really asking students to ask teachers that know them well, can speak on their behalf in terms of their strength as a student, not only in terms of their achievement, but in terms of their growth and contributions in an academic setting. And the expectation, right, as I talked about sort of the recommendations being one of those supportive pieces of the application, the understanding is that those recommendations are going to be supportive of you. It's not likely that a student would ask a teacher who would not be supportive of their candidacy and would not be positive about their experience with them in an academic setting specifically. So, read the directions very carefully in terms of whatever college or university you're applying to, but making sure certainly that those recommendations in terms of those teacher recommendations are representative of academic core courses. There are colleges, universities that will take supplemental information outside of that area. You may have a teacher who may not have taught you in an academic setting, but they are an athletic coach or a club advisor. Those are recommendations. Certainly you want to make sure that the college or university is willing to accept in addition, not instead of, those core academic courses that I've referred to. But at the same time, certainly again, reading directions about what expectations are for those application materials at college and universities is really important in the admissions process. And if you're not quite clear on it, certainly you've got great resources in your school counseling office at your high school, but at the same time, reach out to us on the college side if you've got real questions about, who, not in terms of the person themselves, but sort of what representative academic areas in terms of those teacher references would be recommended by us on the admissions side.
And how and when should a student ask for a letter of recommendation? How much notice should they give?
So my general piece of advice there is make sure that you're allowing enough time for that teacher to write the kind of thoughtful, supportive recommendation that you would want them to write on your behalf in your college application. So for some teachers, that is 4 weeks. For other teachers, that could be a week. My guess is that if you're asking one of your teachers to write a recommendation, think about how many people are in your graduating class. I'm sure that there are probably at least a dozen other students making that same request. And allowing somebody who you respect and you respect their time to have as much time as possible to write that compelling kind of positive recommendation that you hope they will. I really encourage doing that as far in advance as possible, but certainly not years in advance. So given that you're approaching your senior year now, now might be a great time just to send an email over the summer to let them know that you're looking for them and hoping for them to write a recommendation on your behalf in the upcoming application cycle, giving them the details that you have now in terms of what that deadline might be. If you know that, for example, the places that you plan to apply to might have an application deadline of October 1st or November 15th, letting them know that as well. but certainly making sure that you acknowledge the reasons why you're asking them to write the recommendation. Particularly, it might be because you have an interest in studying that academic area later on. That's not a requirement by any stretch to ask for a recommendation from a teacher, but it could be very particularly because you really feel positively about the connection you've made with that teacher, and you feel like that you've achieved well and really demonstrated your ability as a student specifically in that class, and you really believe that they can speak to that. The other piece is really looking at a more recent class that you've taken, a more recent class that you may have taken with a teacher. So for example, if you have a choice of asking a teacher who taught you in a class in your junior year as opposed to your first year in high school, my recommendation is it should be more recent. And part of that is because we hope that this is the case. And I'm sure you'd probably concur, is that you've grown probably quite a bit, even in just 1 year of high school, let alone 3 years of high school. And you want that growth to be reflected and that evolution in who you are as a student to really be reflected in that recommendation. And so asking a teacher to write a recommendation from a class that you took in ninth grade 3 years ago at this point probably isn't going to do you as much good in terms of helping us understand on the admissions side sort of who you've evolved into as a student more recently. So that would be my other recommendation on all that too, is sort of looking at your more recent opportunities. If you've had a teacher multiple times, that's even better, because they can actually really speak to sort of literally your evolution as a student and how they've seen you grow and how they've seen you hopefully improve and strengthen as a student. And so I think that that's really, that's something that would be a bonus if that happens to be the case. If it's not, it's certainly, it's not expected that you're going to ask a teacher who's had you multiple times in the course of your high school career in class.
So seniors, don't wait till the last minute, the day before your application's due, to ask a teacher to write a letter of recommendation. You want to give them plenty of time so they can write a really good letter. And you talked about the details and adding the details. What information should a student give to the teacher or the staff member that's going to write them a letter recommendation? We use a form called a brag sheet, which kind of simplifies it a little bit. The student can access the brag sheet and then they can enter their information. It kind of gives them sample questions. But what kind of things do you think a student should be information giving to the teachers that's writing the letter so they can really write a really good recommendation?
Yeah, I think that brag sheet is a great mechanism. So students, you should feel really very good that your high school knows to do this for you. So that's already built in. I think the other piece is even, so you're going to request that recommendation from the teacher. If they say yes, which is what the hope is, I think in return, then what you want to do is provide some details about perhaps, even just what you imagine might be helpful to them as far as describing sort of the schools that you're applying to. Might there be something descriptive there in terms of your interest in whether it's a particular academic program or whether it's interest in a particular school that might help them then frame their commentary to things that would be relevant to that recommendation specifically. But I think that brag sheet is really most of it. I think the other details in terms of letting them know what it's due, letting them know why you have interest in a particular college or program will help them frame it a little bit. But at the same time, I think that most of the information is really coming in from that request in terms of really saying, these are the reasons why I'd really love for you to speak on my behalf, because you have seen me grow, you've seen me evolve, you've seen me in an academic setting in which I have interest in ultimately. And again, none of these are required. Like, you're not required. I just want to emphasize, just because you might be interested in pursuing English, you don't have to ask an English teacher specifically to write your reference, but certainly that's an option.
Do colleges read all of the letters of recommendation? And how much of an impact do these letters of recommendation have on that decision-making process?
Yeah. So besides the question of who should I ask to write my recommendation, related to recommendation questions that I get is, do you really read these recommendation letters? And I can tell you personally, from my experience directly, as well as my teams, we read those recommendations. And the purpose there is it's an opportunity for us to understand you beyond sort of what is two-dimensionally in your application, from the perspective of your teachers and people that have spent time with you over a succession of time, over a sustained period of time. It's, even if it's 40 minutes every day, but it's for 180 days a year, that's a significant amount of time that this person has some perspective about who you are as a student and what you would contribute potentially to a learning community and to a residential community on a college campus. So I will tell you, yes, we do read them. We wouldn't ask for them if we didn't. And at the same time, to be fair, they are not the sole determinant of an admissions decision by any stretch. As I talked about, it's one of those supporting pieces of a whole application. And so while it is important and it provides additional context for us as the admission readers, it is not by any stretch the only factor or the only element, and I shouldn't describe it as factor, but the only piece of the application that determines your admissions decision. So yes, take it seriously, take the time and please ask your teachers in a respectful and timely manner. But at the same time, do not believe in any, it's not, again, the only thing that determines your admissions decision by any stretch, but it does support the entire application portfolio for you.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the college application and to talk about letters of recommendation.